Yeah, in the future, you might want to turn on auto start on the stream so that way it'll automatically go.
Okay.
All right.
Oh, I thought it's like automatically turned on, but
Yeah,
is it on now?
Yeah, it should be on now.
Yeah, it's on now.
Okay.
All right.
You're good to go.
Have fun.
Is it on now?
Yeah, it should be on now.
Yeah, it's on now.
Okay.
All right.
You're good to go.
Have fun.
Is it on now?
Yeah, it should be on now.
Yeah, it's on now.
Okay. You're good to go.
Have fun.
Is it on now?
Yeah, it should be on.
Gianna, turn off your audio.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, I think we are live and streaming. So unless I hear differently, I'm going to start talking. Hi, my name is Raj Singh. I'm a product manager at InterSystems, and I'm also an MIT grad. I went through many, many years of grad schools in urban studies and planning, and got a master's and a PhD there, PhD in information systems and planning. So I'm a sponsor here with InterSystems. I'm also a mentor and particularly interested in the urban innovation thread, and excited to hear what ideas people have over there on that topic. And I'll be around Saturday to try to help people out, especially with our database platform, InterSystems IRIS, which I'm going to talk about tonight. So hope everybody is excited for the weekend to get started. And what I'm going to talk about is what I like to call the most interesting database that you've never heard of before. So InterSystems IRIS has been around. We are actually an MIT startup from about 40 years ago. And our founder went down to MGH when they were, just getting started in the information management business, I suppose. It was before my time, but helped them get really one of the first databases, healthcare databases set up. And this company grew up out of that. And so for many, many decades now, we've been very strong in the healthcare market. And I think most Americans, if you go to a US hospital, you'll probably have some record of health information stored in an InterSystems database, which is pretty exciting. But we took that expertise and expanded into a general purpose database platform, which I'm going to introduce today. So we're going to talk about some of the InterSystems IRIS is the name of the product, InterSystems IRIS data platform. And it has really a host of features from sort of the traditional database stuff you'd expect, SQL access, has a built-in web application serving platform, which is great for building REST services, which we're going to touch on today or tonight. And also makes it very easy with that built-in web server to serve front-end applications. And that's what I'm gonna try to walk through tonight. In addition to that, there's a machine learning platform built in, and what we call an interoperability extension, which allows you to easily do sort of ETL type operations, extract, transform, load, get data in, process data, move it around, sort of like you might see in a tool like Kafka. But all these things you can explore later on in the weekend. We also have a bunch of healthcare specific modules built, which you can also use if you're interested in the health tech thread. And I'm gonna just jump right in and go through some ways you can get started using the database. Okay, so let me share my screen. So this is going to be a live demo. And hopefully everything is going to go well. I'm not going to speak from slides. I'm just going to sort of think the best way to learn something is to hear somebody talk about how they use it, especially when you're a developer. So we've created this page here, which is your homepage for the weekend on all things InterSystems. It's under getting started.intersystems.com/hackathon. And here you'll find a lot of stuff which could be of use. First off, we have a video which sort of walks you through learning the technology, which I will not go through. You can play that on your own. Then a link to the full stack tutorial, which is what I'm going to go through tonight. And then below that, you have so I'm going to go through a lot of things which you're not going to, you're going to see some functionality, but you're not really going to see how to set it up, how to set up your IDE and connect to the database and all that stuff. So you can refer back here to learn how to set up Visual Studio Code and get, download the database with Docker, things like that. We also have some templates set up through GitHub, and you'll find those here in the explanation. So you can, run Docker Compose to get your database set up and pull in some pre-built code from GitHub repos and just get going really fast. And then there's some stuff at the end about integrated ML. But let's go right up here to the full stack tutorial, which we're going to talk about tonight. So this link is kind of, if you're not logged into the database or to this web page, the URL will work, but you won't see it in the menu. So this is sort of a secret URL because this tutorial is kind of in a beta stage right now. But you'll get this, if you get this URL, getting started at intersystems.com/full-stack, you're good to go. So I'm going to skip over a lot of the intro. You can read this on your own later, but what we're going to do here is pretend that we're setting up a coffee roasting business. And we're going to have to accept fresh, raw coffee beans coming in from all over the world. We bring it into our inventory, and then we take it into our coffee roastery. And then after it's roasted, we put it in bags and put it out on an online storefront, or put in a catalog, which can then be seen in the online storefront, which we're going to build with Vue.js single page web app. And let's get going in there. So first step, database design and setup. So this tutorial is broken up into 3 parts. The first part is about setting up the database and getting going, learning a little bit about how you use SQL with the database. And in part 2, we're going to set up the REST services, for which we'll use built-in custom language. It's not quite proprietary, but it is custom, called ObjectScript, which is really cool because it's close to the database. When you run these things, when you're doing your queries on the database, you're doing them right next to the database instead of over internet connections. So you get database results you do big searches really quick, you get small pieces of data, and then you serve them back to the website instead of what you might be used to in a traditional in setting. And in part, playing around with it. So let's just jump in here. So I have the database all set up Docker, and so I have it local in a container. I don't have to use the online clouds version. But if you don't have this already set up, you don't want to use Docker, you don't know about Docker, if you're not logged in, there will be a button here instead of settings. There'll be a button here saying log in. And then once you log in, you can launch an online sandbox, and it'll automatically provision your container with InterSystems IRIS in the cloud. And you have a URL like this, weird URL that you can use to get a free database. And let me just show you. So I did this a little while ago. So I want to log into the, so you'll see I'm in a web browser here. The this is why I decided to use my local version, because it's a little bit slow here. But okay, here's our management portal. So you'll see I have this weird URL to get to the web-based management portal user interface to do a bunch of the stuff that I talked about. Analytics, interoperability, System Explorer. We can go here and run SQL. But I'm gonna quit out of that right now because I'm gonna use my local copy. But just to let you know, so if you do go to this page later and want to run everything in the cloud, you'll get the sandbox setting, which you'll use. You replace a lot of the localhost URLs you're going to see tonight with whatever you get here. These will be custom to you for the weekend. Okay, so the first thing you'll do is clone this repo I have here, which gives you all the code you'll need to do the tutorial. And I've already done that, so I'm not going to do that again. But once you clone the repo, it'll look like this. Basically, you'll get a coffee code directory with 3 main subdirectories: front end, services, and setup. And that's in reverse order. We're going to use setup and then services and then front end. And you're going to have to connect. First of all, you'll have to install 2 extensions: the ObjectScript extension, which will help you with part 2, and the InterSystem Server Manager extension, but all that is explained later on. The important thing to know for that is that when you want to connect to your database, you're going to have to create some cool settings here. And if you have any trouble with that, I'll be around all weekend to help with, and we have some tutorial information online. But my database is running locally, so my host is localhost. Port it's exposing access through is 52773. So that's here, right in there. And that's in my VS Code settings. So I am all good to go. So as you go through this tutorial, I'm just going to expand setup here. As you go through this tutorial, it's going to tell you about creating your databases with regular SQL. So there's two databases that we create here, ICO inventory and ICO.catalog. And if I go to that management portal I talked about, so here's my localhost version. It'll look like this when you log on. You go to System Explorer, SQL, and this is a little built-in SQL client that you can use to quickly run some commands. I'm going to filter so you can see that I already have them. I already have these databases here, so I've created the databases, but I haven't put anything in them yet. So let's go back to the exercise and talk about how to put stuff in here. So the first part of creating the coffee company is getting stuff, coffee beans coming in from different places in the world and cataloging them into a database, which is a really common thing you want to do. Set up, create your schema, which you just did with this SQL, and then populate it with records. And in this case, we're going to run some insert commands to put data in. So the first thing I'm going to do, put some sample coffee bean orders into the database. I insert, just using regular SQL again, I'm going to insert into ICO inventory. My vendor ID is eTrader. Product code is Ethiopia 32. And I've got 200 kilograms of it, quantity kg, and the date of arrival is September 11th, 2020. And then I have, oh, you're not seeing, I'm not sharing my screen, I'm just sharing my browser window, which No good for you. Okay, so hopefully this will be better now. Now you'll see that I have a web browser window here, and I also have a Visual Studio Code window here. This will make a lot more sense. So I was talking about directories and Git cloning the Coffee Co repository and having these directories. So now you'll see setup, services, and front end. So now I lost my train of thought. Oh, I was inserting data into the database with some little SQL insert commands. So this works like any other database. We have 5 insert commands here. I'm creating 5 different records for big shipments of coffee beans, 100 kilograms, 200 kilograms. It's probably not that big, but big enough for our sample. So once I insert all these into ICO inventory, I can go back into my little SQL client here, and I'm going to select star from ICO.inventory, hit execute, and we'll see these records in here. Oh, looks like it did something weird with my entry date. So this is the fun with a live demo. It's not liking the way I'm inserting the date field. Okay. Well, that shouldn't matter. It doesn't matter. It'll just be old coffee. But we do have coffee beans in there, but they were put in a long time ago in 1846. But I don't think that'll break the application. Like I said, this is beta, so we're going to have to fix this. So we also have, if you don't want to do raw SQL, there is a Python program here that will do all these insertions for you. And just read it from a JSON file. Python command actually reads this JSON file and creates all those SQL commands for you. So you can play around with that if you prefer Python over SQL. So in this tutorial, we'll tell you more about how the SQL is working, give you some details on that, learn a little bit of Python as well. So we queried from the database. We saw that. We didn't see good dates, but that's okay. So let's try some queries here. Let's see if the quantities worked well. So I'm going to select star from the inventory data table where quantity kg is greater than 100. Let's make sure that works. Good. So the quantities went in correctly. We've got 2 records there with quantities of 200. And then let's see if the vendor field is working. So select star from ICO inventory where vendor ID is like DKE. Okay, good, and that's working too. So we've got a decent table there with a little bit of inventory. And then there's a little exercise here, a little section do on your own to create some more records in there, but we're just going to move along for now and create the REST services, because this is, I think, the most interesting part and the most unknown, or this will be new technology for everybody because it uses our ObjectScript code or language. So the first thing you do here, we get some lessons on connecting through Visual Studio Code to the database. As I talked about before, you got to get some settings properly put in there. And then this is the cool thing. So I'm going to go through this. So remember earlier on when we created the database with a SQL statement, just a basic show that again. Just the basic create table ICO.inventory, vendor ID, varchar 128. If you know SQL, this is very familiar to you. But what happened on the back end is it also created ObjectScript class files, which are basically like a direct data binding between code and the database. So by adding the ObjectScript extension to Visual Studio Code, I am able to, I get this new button here in Visual Studio, in VS Code, ObjectScript button, and this lets me browse my tables on the database. My namespace is ICO, so I look in here and I have two files here, catalog.cls and inventory.cls. And these were automatically created for me when I ran that SQL statement. And this will be, this is a little bit cryptic, but that's okay. The whole point is that you don't have to care too much. But this is the ObjectScript expression of the SQL language. So where on one hand, oh, VS Code closes these files for me if I'm not editing. So when I created ICO.inventory, I created a field vendor ID varchar 128. If I go into the inventory class file, you'll see I got vendor ID with no underscore between vendor and ID. And it got created as a library.string type, which is the ObjectScript equivalent of varchar. And we have a maxlen equal 128, which matches up with that varchar 128. And then some sort of internally used stuff about what column that property is and what its SQL field name is, which is vendor underscore ID. Now in the exercise here, we talk about, okay, so we've got relational data in a relational table. We have a ObjectScript code expression of it, but we also want to export it. We also want to see it as JSON sometimes. So we also need to, aside from the code mapping and the relational mapping, we need to create a JSON mapping. And so this talks about, okay, so we can create JSON automatically from the database, but if we don't like the field names, we can also do a little custom stuff to edit that. So where we have this vendor ID, we want to say that when we express that as JSON, we want it to be vendor underscore ID. So I put a little, we're just going to put a little annotation in here, JSON field name equals vendor underscore ID. And I'm not going to do that. I already have that code written, so I'm just going to bring it up. Oh, I have a couple questions here. Can I clarify what ObjectScript is? So ObjectScript is a programming language like Python or Java or anything else like that. The key thing for us, which you'll see more and more as I go through this demo, is that it is optimized for use with the InterSystems IRIS platform. So you can do a lot of basic stuff with it, everything you do with any programming language, but you can also do some really custom stuff with our database, like this JSON field name mapping. There's a bunch of stuff that that really provide optimizations to working with the IRIS data platform. So if I jump back into ObjectScript, you won't see it here. In a second, we're going to talk about a class where you'll see stuff that looks much more like regular programming language. But right now, so I'm going to, in the GitHub repo, there's a CLS underscore sample directory with all the code pre-written. So I'm just going to jump over to here and show you this. So you'll see here my vendor ID property already has the JSON field name equals vendor underscore ID. And every field that I want that done for is already done. Vendor product code becomes vendor underscore product underscore code. So I am just going to copy all this code, put it into the place where it actually gets published. Now I'm going to save it. And I'm going to say overwrite the server version. Now, this is another really interesting thing about ObjectScript. I told you that it runs near the database. It actually runs in the database. So in most programming languages, you compile the code on your machine, and then you have an executable. With ObjectScript, your computer doesn't know how to compile ObjectScript code. Only the database knows. So what I'm actually doing when I save this is I'm saving the text you see up to the database, and it's compiling it, translating it into machine code. And the only place it can do the things a code compiler does is in the ObjectScript server. That's the only place that knows how to lint the file and do all the checks that you do on any kind of code, any sort of compilation step. So there is no standalone compiler for ObjectScript. You're always compiling inside the database. So that's inventory. I'm going to go to catalog. Catalog is the class or the table and class that we're going to use to store roasted coffee already put in bags. That's going to be shown on the web storefront. I also have some stuff that I want to change the JSON for in this one, such as catalog ID becomes catalog underscore ID. That's the only thing I'm really changing, but you can get much trickier about this. Overwrite the server version again. So this will come in handy very soon, because the whole point here is that we don't want to do a lot of database specific stuff. We want to abstract away the database and only expose business processes through REST services. And this is a really common methodology when you get into big businesses, which have many moving parts. You don't want your development staff to really have access directly to the database, be able to change, the schema of data structures and things like that. You really only want operational people to be able to interact with the information on a higher level, where they can only do specific tasks. And that's why REST services have gotten so big, because it allows you to, like I said, abstract away what's happening at the database level from what people need to do on a daily basis, and which also allows you to change things on the database side when you want to without changing the APIs that you're exposing through your REST services. And vice versa. You can change your REST services without changing what you're doing on the database side. So how am I on timing? What is a REST service again? Okay, so REST service is probably what you're used to, any sort of service. The only way people are building applications nowadays, or APIs nowadays are RESTful APIs, where you interact with something with a service through HTTP. You'll probably interact with it through a URL if it's a GET request. Or if you want to change data when you post a form from a web page, you're doing a post request. Back decades ago, there were a lot more different kinds of services that were competing with each other. The big one around 2000 were SOAP services, which were much heavier weight. I don't want to get into a big discussion of those, but they allowed you to put a lot of metadata around the requests for really good business reasons, to allow you to put authentication stuff around the request and really make sure that only people who are allowed to make changes to data were doing it, or only allow people who are authorized to see certain data or getting it, and version things and do a lot of complicated stuff. But they turned out to be way too complicated even for big businesses, and they didn't get used very much. And over time, the REST services kind of became the de facto standard for API-based development. And there's the canonical reference is Dan Fielding's thesis on representational state transformation. I forget what REST stands for at this moment, but it is this idea grew up over the last 20 years and became pretty much all what you know as APIs. I don't think anybody builds anything but RESTful APIs nowadays. But I'll show you a couple of things. We'll learn more about RESTful services in a second. A key idea behind RESTful services is you only use the internet and you only use the verbs of the internet, which are get, post, delete, put. I think there's a couple less used ones like head, but when you want to get some data and not change anything on the server, you make a GET request, and that will give you back the state of some object, the state of some piece of information. When you want to update, you can do, when you want to create something or modify it, you'll either use a post or a put request. And we'll see posts and gets in a second. Okay, so now this is going all over the place, but that's why we have a tutorial, so you can follow through it in order. Sorry for jumping around. So I changed these classes, which represent tables, to also be able to represent JSON. And now we're actually going to did all this little stuff. So now we're actually going to build a REST service. So the way these things work in general, when any company exposes an API, whenever you see an API, basically people are doing two things. I'm going to bring up my code here. The first thing they're doing is they're exposing a URL to the internet. And this is the URL through which you're going to get access to this. And they're usually called routes. So that's why we have this routes language in here. So we have a route section at the end of this file, and we have about, 6 routes here. One of them is /inventory/listbeans. So what this is saying is, I'm going to expose this code through a web server, and I don't know what it's going to be right now because it depends on you. It depends on what particular web server you put it on, what domain name you own, whatever. Let's say you own coffeecompany.com. So if I put this out through coffeecompany.com, this URL will be coffeecompany.com/inventory/listbeans. When somebody types that into a browser, it's going to, that command or that request is going to be routed through this file, handler.cls, and it is going to go and call a function called listRawBeans. And in my case, in this simple case, that function is right here in this same file, but it could be anywhere. It could be a whole nother piece of code in another file, but we have everything in the same file. So this is the whole life cycle here is somebody out on the internet makes a request, coffeecompany.com/inventory/listbeans. Whatever you put in a web browser is a GET request. So when you have the GET method, you'll eventually call listRawBeans. And if we go find this function, listRawBeans, this function is going to query the database, get a bunch of columns from ico.inventory, group it up by vendor product code and order by date arrival, and then it's going to create some JSON and push it back out to the client. In the case that I just described, the client's a web browser, and it's going to write all this JSON out to the web browser. So let's test that one as an example. So like I said, we have to hook this thing. This code on its own you don't know where it's going to be served from because you have to put it on a web server or web application server actually. So let's do that. So InterSystems IRIS has a built-in web application server. And I talked about the management portal here. One of the things you can do everything through the management portal. And one of the things you can do is create RESTful services or web applications, we call them. you can create many kinds of services other than REST services, but we're going to create a REST service. And I just can't remember if I already created this one today, and no, I didn't. So we're going to get to see a new one. So I'm going to create a new web application. I'm going to call it /API/CoffeeCo. I think that's the name I used throughout the exercise. Let's just make sure. Yep. API/CoffeeCo. Namespace, I'm just going to, this is a database specific thing. We're always going to use namespace user. Important thing here is the dispatch class. This is going to be a RESTful service. And the class that's going to call is handler.cls. So I'm going to, actually this class is in the namespace ICO. So I have to say ICO.handler. And no authentication required. But I'm also going to, we need some rules there. So now, I lied earlier. I said, if the domain you owned, if the site you were going to put this on was coffeecompany.com, the URL would be coffeecompany.com/inventory/listbeans. That's not totally true. Because here, when I created my web application, I said that there's going to be something in between the domain, the basic web server, and the application. And it's going to be this API layer. So I'm going to, the only time anything is going to get to the handler class is if it starts with API/CoffeeCo. So we've got domain, API CoffeeCo, and then whatever is in this route URL. So let's see if that works. So my domain here happens to be localhost:52773. Then I put in API.CoffeeCo, and then any of these things. So let's put in inventory list beans. And voila, we get back row count 5, and we get back a bunch of items, which these are the exact things we saw earlier on in the database, which I will go back to here. So remember, we looked at the inventory database. And we had all this stuff in it, vendor ID, vendor product code, in traditional relational sense. We just built a little web service here to return it as JSON. So the same thing, vendor ID, vendor product code, date arrival. And like I said, all these dates are wrong, but that's okay. And the quantity. So let's go back to the exercise. So we're going to build out, basically we're going to build out these 6 web services I show here. Remember I talked about how RESTful APIs or RESTful services, those words are interchangeable. You have a few different verbs you can use. Get when you just want to read data, put or post if you want to alter data. Here you'll see a post request. So the next one we're going to build is, okay, when I want to take beans out of inventory and roast them, I'm actually going to be changing the database, because once I take them out of inventory, I have to decrement the inventory to get rid of the whatever quantity of kilograms I took out. So when I use this API, I want to get beans, this particular bean ID, and how much I want to take out. And that's a post request. Another one we're going to do is, okay, so I want to take stuff. Does this one make sense? I'm going to just jump to this one. I want to sell stuff. So if I want to sell coffee beans, which we're going to see at the end, I'm going to sell product. Once again, I need to know the product ID and the quantity of bags I'm selling. And so if I get that kind of request, that's going to be routed to the sell product method, which is up there somewhere, which I'll show you later. But let's keep going. So there's a bunch of stuff to just get information out of the database. Those are simple get calls that you can put right into your web browser. When you do post requests, you can't put it into a web browser, but you can use a tool like Postman or curl or something like that. So we're just going to build up, this exercise goes through building up a bunch of these REST API calls and writing the code to implement them by writing ObjectScript to basically do database queries. And you'll see a lot of really common stuff that you'll see in any programming language. Like this is a method, we call it a class method here. List raw beans, we only return a status code. You'll see a try block here, which is really common. So if something goes wrong inside a try block, you want to jump out. If you get an exception in here, you catch it here and you do something. Basically, you'll do something if something goes wrong within the try block. That's a really common programming technique you'll see in pretty much every language. In here and deeper in here, you'll see a while loop, which is another common thing. So what we're doing here is a really common programming paradigm, which is, okay, we're going to go, first we'll wrap everything in a try block because it might not work and we want to do something if it doesn't work. But the first thing we're going to try to do is create the database. We create our SQL statement. We execute it against the database. We get back, hopefully, a good number of records. And while rs.next means, while rs.%next, this is cool ObjectScript little thing that lets you iterate through a series of rows that are returned. And for every row that's returned, you're really just going to push the values onto an array before expressing them as JSON in these last few lines here. So for every row, push 4 of the values from the row onto an array. And then after you're done with that, basically all this says is create a JSON object, throw the row count into the first key, and then put all the items into an array as the next key. And that's what we saw here. We have JSON, objects begin, we have a row count key there, then we have all the items in an array. Boom, 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 boom. So that's what this ObjectScript code does. Okay, so right now we have done nothing about, all we've done is created an inventory. We haven't roasted any beans. We listed the raw beans over here. Oh, over here, list beans. But now we have to take them out of the inventory by using, oh, I'm running out of time. I'm gonna have to speed up here. We have to take them out of the inventory with this other command I talked about, get beans. So get raw beans, let's jump up to that and quickly see what that does. Get raw beans is going to query the database for the existence of the product ID that we want. And ObjectScript, like I said, it has a lot of really nice optimizations for working with our database. Here's another nice one. You don't actually have to run a SQL query to figure out if it's going to work. You can, if you're querying by ID, you can use this really nice little %existsID command, which will quickly just say, hey, does this ID exist? If not, I'm not even going to try anything complicated. So if it doesn't exist, we throw an error. If it does, we're going to open up that record. So if you're querying by ID, by a primary key, if you know anything about databases, primary keys are always unique, and our ID key is a unique primary key. And so you know you're only going to get back one record when you query on that key, and so you can just open it. We have this nice item, which this nice convenience method, which says open up this thing, put it into an ObjectScript object. That's why it's called ObjectScript, because it's an object-based language. But instead of getting back some SQL relational view of the data and having to process that in order to use it in code, this command lets it go right into a program or a code like object, a programming like object. So we have this item thing, which we can which we can then access the properties of the item with just dot notation. So I say open ID, whatever the ID is, I get back an item, then I can just say, okay, when I want to know what the quantity in kilograms is, I can just say item.quantity kg. So I quickly check if we have enough of it to fulfill the request. And if not, if we don't, there's an error. But if we do, we'll send back, once again, we'll send back the JSON. So let's see if this one works. So we did the list beans so we could see the IDs and the quantities. So let's say I want to get 20 kilograms of Ethiopia 32 for roasting. So once again, I know I need this. The API always starts with my server /API/coffeeco. And this is a post request, right? So I can't. I could use Postman, but I think I'm just going to use the built-in terminal here. I'm not awesome with curl, but let's try it. Curl -x post. How many people here know curl? Love curl. So my ID here was, let's just go with 1. And the quantity I want to get back, 20 kilograms. So you'll see here, I have little colon ID, colon quantity. Those are just placeholders for variables which will be put in. So I'm going to get beans, ID 1, quantity 20. And successful. So I just took out 20 kilograms of this Ethiopia 32. So now when I run list beans, this should no longer be 200, this should be 180. Let me just check to make sure that happens. Yes. So I just decremented the quantity of inventory of Ethiopia 32 because we're roasting that right now and putting it in bags. Pretend we're doing that right now. And then the next step I want to do is once that's roasted, I want to stick it into the online catalog. And I have a nice little script to simulate that. If we took out a bunch of things from inventory. So did I set this up right? Let's see, let's change. So I created this little convenience file with data already in there, which will simulate making all these curl calls that I need to stick data into the catalog. So if we look back at this, let me pull up my handler class again. So another command we wanted to look at was catalog product, or not command, API, REST API call. Catalog product is going to take beans after they're roasted and bagged up, stick it into the catalog. And this is a post method. So in this case, in the previous case, we did a post, but all the information was in the URL. In this case, the post is going to be in a JSON file when we have to catalog a product. So let me go to that method and show you that when we're sending in a JSON file, we use the special command get JSON from request, but I won't get into the details there. But suffice it to say that this is why I'm basically going to do this curl -x post, but send this whole file as the content, this whole little JSON object. So let me put in dates that make sense because this will become important in a second. So let's say we are roasting all this stuff today or recently. Let's roast, we did 2 roasts today, 1 roast yesterday, and let's say some of these were about 7 days ago. So they're getting kind of old. Oh. If you're a coffee aficionado, you know that you want freshly roasted beans all the time. Okay, so I have a little script here, which is going to make all the, I just didn't want to write these 5 curl requests. I wanted to automate that process. So I made a little bash file here, bash script here, which is going to iterate through all my JSON files in this directory. It's actually a nice thing to, nice sample to have on your, in your repertoire. So it's going to look at all the JSON files in this directory, and it's going to do curl -x post, send it through this API here to the catalog product, RESTful service. And it's this little @ symbol basically says, get your data for the curl command from the stuff in this file. So I'm going to run that. What's it called? Load products. And I get success. So that, I know I'm going very quick here and I'm getting close to the end of time, so I'm going to go faster. But if we go back to SQL, we are going to see that we have products in our catalog now. Oh, why don't I have products in my catalog? It's going to be a big problem here with my demo being successful. Uh-oh. This is why I have screenshots. Come on, right database. This makes no sense to me. Let's just try to do it manually. I can never remember the syntax of these things. This is a good learning exercise. API. Why did it tell me success when it wasn't successful? Okay, well, this is why we have screenshots. So if you go back to the exercise, you will see that once you get to part 3, and we go through and create that front-end web app, you should see something that looks like this, where you'll get basically a web page with a bunch of product listings. And I don't think that's going to work right now because that seems to be an empty database, but yep. So something went wrong, which I'm not sure of, but if you talk to me later, I'll get this right. I'll get this fixed and show it to you. But this should be showing you any products that got loaded in there. And so, yeah, sorry, the big payoff didn't work out here, but we'll get that fixed up and show it to you later. And there's a bunch of really basic Vue.js. I didn't do anything really fancy there, but there's in the front end directory here, there's some Vue.js code you can look at to see how you would build a front end web application very quickly. And that's something you may be able to use this weekend to jumpstart some web application development, whether you use our database or not. It's basically a little storefront that accesses makes little database calls at certain points, and I can help you with that stuff too. But let me know. I'll be around all weekend. I'll be on the mentors channel and other places in the sponsor tower, and I'll be around to help you out. So we just hit 1 hour, so are there any questions I can answer? I know that was really quick run through. Basically, thing I'd tell you, remember this hackathon page. You can find all the information there, and you can find us in the InterSystems room and on Slack. So I've got a couple questions here. Free trial or discounted access to InterSystems? Yes, you can. I don't know if we have the Docker link. So those templates I showed you on the hackathon page, everything's free, basically. You can either, if you're familiar with Docker, we have a free version called InterSystems Community available in the Docker store. It's free forever. It's just limited in some ways. You can't scale it to like 100 different instances. You can't build you can't build an eBay with it, but you can definitely use it. That's the best way to use it if you know Docker. I told you, you can fire up what we call a sandbox, which is just us hosting your Docker instance basically through the web. And you can get to that through any of the exercises on this getting started page. Whenever you get to any place where you might want to use it, like I said, you'll see it here. Oh, see, it logged me out already. So you'll see when you go and look at the full stack tutorial and you look at setup, you'll see this little link here, which helps you, basically just walks you through getting a free version for the weekend on our dime. But I would recommend getting going with Docker. Okay, anything else? Okay, is that, ask the host, is that all the questions? Nothing else came in? Oh, my path to becoming a product manager. That was a really long path, I guess. I'll do a shout out to the IBM group. I've been in Cambridge a long time, I guess now 25 years. So I was at IBM working in developer advocacy, developer relations for about 5 years before coming to InterSystems. And I think product management and developer relations share a lot of the same things where you're touching on the parts of the business. Before that, I had founded a couple startups. So a product manager is not an executive, but the next step, it's more hands-on than sort of the CXO level, where you have to know a little bit of marketing, a little bit of sales, a lot of development, and a lot of how to interact with the market and customers to figure out what people want. And so you're sort of like, sometimes people describe it as you're the CEO for a particular product in a company. And so it's a really fun job, very interesting, and kind of stumbled into it through a life, kind of like a career in entrepreneurship, I guess. And in the corporate environment, product manager was the closest thing to running your own company without a lot of the risk. But I think you can actually, I've seen a lot of people go to business school, particularly with the intention of becoming a product manager at a company. So that would probably be the most traditional route, but I did not take that route. Any other questions? Okay. We'll have a fun weekend, and I hope to see a lot of you on Slack and around the virtual community this weekend.